Business Spotlight, brought to you by Cross Rhythms and Baba Baboon.
I'm Sonya. This is Business Spotlight in partnership with Cross Rhythms City Radio and Baba Baboon. Joining me in the studio this week, we've got the lovely George Lowe from Lowe's on Carter Street. Hello, George.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for having me in.
You're very welcome. How are you?
Living the dream. It's a beautiful day. I'm going to the Sandwich Club after for some
Nice.
lunch. Life's good. No complaints. Thank you very much.
Good. Well, thank you so much for coming in to the studio for Business Spotlight. George, before we go anywhere, I just want to ask you, obviously Lowe's on Carter Street is a restaurant.
It is.
But how did you get there? What journey did you take to actually open your own restaurant?
Oh, I like to joke and tell people it's because I was dropped on my head a lot as a child, if I'm honest. But no, I've always been interested in food. Going through school, I think the pinnacle point for me was winning a food competition when I was about 12, 13 years old, something like that. And then from then, just kind of fell in love with everything hospitality. I've been lucky enough to go around the world in hospitality. It's looked after me as a sector a lot, and I feel very privileged that we can give back to the sector. Now we have Lowe's. But the reason opening it is I think my wife likes to remind me at school, I always said I'd love to own a restaurant. I don't recall that too much. But when we got to our late 20s, 30s, we decided we haven't got any kids. If we were going to do it, now's the time to do it. So as a family, we grew up in Uttoxeter. We're from Uttoxeter. And we always felt there was a need for a restaurant that was maybe of a little bit more of a up caliber than we had at the moment. The people of Uttoxeter know me as a person. We've done plenty of charity work in the town, and we thought, if we're going to do it, let's put Uttoxeter on the map as a culinary destination in Staffordshire, which is what we strive to do.
And then how did that, you've mentioned there your previous career and working all around the world, as a chef and everything, but how did you then take that? Because running a business can be completely different. How did you transition from what you did in your career to then being a business owner?
So if this isn't my first business,
Okay.
So very briefly from a career in 60 seconds, I had my first part-time job at 15 at a local pub. I then finished school and went to Birmingham, University College Birmingham for a food qualification where I was there for 2 years. The first year I worked on a kind of day release essentially at a restaurant called Simpson's, which had a Michelin star, very recently closed down, which is a real shame. Closed down just under a month ago, very immediately, which is a sign of the times. The second year I worked with a chef called Steve Love at Love's restaurant. He's a phenomenal chef, fantastic chef. I was very lucky to work for him. I then finished college and moved down to Ascot, which I hated. London is not for me. It's just not where I enjoyed spending any time. Moved back to the Midlands to Branston Golf and Country Club for a couple of years. And then I moved to South Africa where I was a private chef for the rich and famous. So one of my clients at the time was one of the 100 richest men in the world. And I was there for about 4.5 years. But fun fact, I was an illegal immigrant the whole time I was there. I went through they changed their visa laws, which made me an illegal immigrant overnight. Got to a point where I had to leave, came back into the UK, decided that I wanted to do something a little different than restaurants. So I went into product development. So I spent 6 years or so in product development, what we use in the industry, both sides of the fence. So what I mean by that is I spent about 4 years developing products that go onto menus. So for the likes of Wetherspoons, Green King, Whitbread, etc. And then my last couple of years, I was the other side of the fence where I worked for a company called Stonegate, which at the time was the biggest pub company in the world. And I was one of their menu development managers. So I developed menus for the brands that sit within that pub group, and then, as I say, we decided as a family that we wanted to open a restaurant. And when I was in Cape Town, as I say, I was a private chef. I was a consultant, so I had a team of about 12 people at one point. It's certainly smaller than that now. So it's not my first time being in business, but I've lived and breathed this since I was 15. So I'm now 33, so 18 years of my life almost every day has been around kitchens, in kitchens, watching kitchens. Anything to do with food I've always loved. So I'd like to think that I'm an expert in it, if anything, just because I've done way more than my 10,000 hours to make myself an expert in it. And we wanted to build something that is public facing, that we could show what we're about, what I'm about as a chef, what I know about hospitality. And the opportunity came up in a building in Uttoxeter, and we took it.
And when was that again, George?
This was in April 23, so we've just turned 3 years old.
Well, congratulations on that as well.
Thank you very much.
But just going into that, obviously you've mentioned all your expertise and all your experience there, and it's not the first time of running a business. But what does it actually take? It might sound like an obvious question, but what does it really take to actually run a hospitality business?
So I want to be quite careful here, in a sense of me not just making this out that it's really difficult and it's very stressful. And, I don't want to downplay just how beautiful running a restaurant is. It's the hardest I've ever known it. I'm sure your listeners and viewers, you'll just need to go on Instagram to see Simon Rogan, Tom Kerridge, Gary Usher, all these people shouting for a bit of change that we need to see in hospitality. But it is, in my opinion, it's life for me. So in our kitchen, on the wall, we have a saying, and it's written in permanent pen along our wall, and it says, "Life is black and white, hospitality is colour." And I truly mean that. I think hospitality is everything in life. I think that's the glue that keeps us all together. I think that's the reason why we're happy. We spend time with loved ones in hospitality. We look forward to it, and that's the reason we did it. So to answer your question, it takes everything. It's certainly not easy. It's the hardest it's ever been. The format now that we have, the format that worked kind of 10 years ago does not work now, and that has worked for millennia. So it takes everything. It takes your eye to be on the ball 24/7. It takes, I think we probably do 70-hour weeks comfortably, sometimes 80-hour weeks. But at the same time, I've kind of, when things are going well and service is going well and we get reviewed as well as we do, I couldn't kind of envision doing anything else. I absolutely love it.
And then, we'll come on to go into it a bit more in depth in a little bit about all the changes in government and everything, which I will ask you about if you're open to explain that. But
open book, anything.
The other thing as well, how else has hospitality changed? Is it different generations? Do they do things differently? How would you see it from all your experience? So
kind of everything's changed, but I can give you a couple of examples of what's changed. So when I went through, especially my Michelin background, and I'm not saying at all that the places I've just mentioned are responsible for this at all. I'm not, but I saw it, and it had happened to me that when you were going through Michelin kitchens and you were a commis chef, it's brutal. It's, sometimes gets a bit physical. It certainly has not done any good for my mental health. The days are starting at 8 a.m. and finishing at 1 the next morning. Right. Sometimes you'll get half an hour sit down break if you're lucky. The odd coffee every once in a while, but that's kind of it, and that's 5-6 days a week. People don't want to do that now, and I don't disagree. I think that's wrong. I think that hospitality is changing for the better in that regard. You see on Kitchen Nightmares, etc., kind of the shouting, and I'm going to use the term abuse that you see in the kitchen. That is no longer acceptable. I don't know personally any kitchens that go through that. I'm sure some high-end kitchens still do, but you certainly hear a lot less of it. The hours are no longer 18 hours. People want a work-life balance, which I agree with. I think that's really important. So I've always kind of publicly said hospitality back in the day was based on slave labour. That's what it was. You didn't get paid anymore. You got paid for your 40 hours and worked double that. You didn't get any overtime, etc. So that's gone. And I think people's expectations of restaurants have changed a lot as well.
Yeah.
I've certainly seen that firsthand. And to be quite honest, I think it's probably the best it's ever been. I think people's versions of hospitality now is incredible, albeit the general public is more demanding in some regards, but actually to deliver fantastic hospitality, in my opinion, is the easiest it's ever been, and I mean that because the bar is now the lowest it's ever been. So it's easy if you're great, but it's very difficult to get out of the rut if you are not, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I just want to ask you something else there as well. You mentioned customers who come in and they'll do reviews, and the world we have now with social media, how have you found that? Is it ever a concern, or where people can just instantly jump on for whatever reason? And does that have a detrimental effect, do you think?
Massively. I mean, not necessarily to us, but we are in a public setting. We're in a public environment, right? I will only guess every single person in this room has eaten out at least once this month, maybe twice, so we're all frequently go into restaurants. So I think to some degree people think they understand the business, the general public do. They don't see all of the work it takes to run it. Now, if me and you were to go into a steel mill, I'm sure neither of us would have any idea of what is going on behind the scenes, nor how anything works. But it seems a little bit differently because people sometimes cook at home or they've gone out frequently. They understand how it is. So yeah, from a reviews perspective, they're really important. I'm not going to use the term lucky. We are not lucky. We graft as a business. Me and my wife graft. Everybody that works for us are hard workers. We really put it down, and we have fantastic reviews. We have off the top of my head, over 400 on TripAdvisor, and we're at 4.98. You can't get to 5 unless you have one negative one, and then it would take it down to 4.9, but we're on 4.98. And on Google, we've got well over 500 and we've got 5 stars. That's something that we work tirelessly for. It's a big indicator that we're doing things correctly and right. It's an indicator that we're looking after the people that come in and that our offer is correct, because if you were too expensive, then people wouldn't feel they got value for money potentially. If you were to be serving subpar ingredients, people would see straight through that and the quality wouldn't be good. So it's a good indicator things are going right. But yeah, to answer your question, it can be devastating. The term that I tell the team all the time is, I'll use the example that you could come into our restaurant, I'll use us as the example, and have a faultless meal. I could be happy with every bit of food put in front of you. The vibes could be right, front of house could be on it, there's no waiting for anything. Everything has gone really well. But if you had a Barney with the missus on the way in, or someone cut you off, or you've had a bad day at work, or you sit at the table and you get an email through from work that really doesn't go your way, it does not matter what happens, you're going to have a bad time. And I think sometimes that spills over into the genuine experience you would have had. Now that doesn't happen to us very often, but it does happen. And I think it's difficult from our perspective that we have our goal is to make you leave happier than you came in, but there's certain factors that we just can't control, and if that spills over, that's where I think it's becomes unfair on a review, if that makes sense. And we see that from time to time, but I see that daily in hospitality, because also, we also don't get it right all the time. We make mistakes the same as everybody else, and I think for the most part we're very good at kind of getting them sorted before the guest sees it. But we're all human and we're all working really long hours, and mistakes happen all the time. So yes, it's difficult, but it's important, and I think it's equal parts fantastic for your business that you can have the public just look at a few metrics and know that they can trust you. But at the same time, going the other way, it only takes one really bad week and that can plummet, and it's very difficult to come back from. And I'm
just going to go on from that now then, George. You kind of touched on it at the beginning of the interview, but I wanted to ask you about challenges overall, like, you know, whether it's government changes or anything like that, rises in price costs. I mean, what challenges, because the hospitality industry has been in the news quite a lot, especially this year, even last year. But what challenges would you say are really becoming a bit of a barrier at the moment?
So I'm going to split this question kind of into two parts. One part I'm going to put as what I'd kind of call our metric challenges. So they're challenges of which you can measure and I can give you data and statistics on. And then the other one I kind of call soft challenges, and that's more of an opinion-based challenge. So if we go to the metric first, when I indicated earlier that the business plan doesn't work anymore, and it has worked for millennia, I'm going to talk about that for a minute or two. So Gary Usher, who is a fantastic chef who owns or did own up to one point a dozen restaurants, I think he owns 3 now. He did an interview on the Rate Good Food or Too Good Food podcast. Apologies, I can't remember what it was, and he talked about this really extensively. The way it used to work back in the day is forget money into a restaurant as a pound figure. I think this is where it gets difficult for people not to understand unless they're in business. Forget it as a pound. It doesn't matter. 25% of whatever went in your till covered your ingredients, 25% covered labour, 25% covered all of your overheads, etc., and the other 25% was profit. This is obviously minus your VAT. That's the way it used to work, and it's worked like that for generations. And in the last 10 years it's all fell apart. That does not work anymore. The statistics that I can give you is, so on a pound 10 years ago you'd make 25% profit quite comfortably. Restaurants were great. That is a fantastic margin to hit. So 25. The way it works now is, if you imagine a pound as your percentage, on average, this isn't Lowe's, and I'll explain why in a few minutes, but on average it's between 35-45%, say average 40% of that pound is labour. Right. So that's gone up considerably. You are then working on roughly a 70% GP, so that means 30% is cost of goods sold on average, and then you have your 20% VAT, which is the highest it's ever been. So 20 plus 40 plus 30 is 90%. So you've already, at pound in the till, 90p of it is to cover the ingredients, the labour and the VAT. That other 10% has to cover rent, rates, energy, which has gone up significantly, which I'll come back to. Has to pay for your cutlery, any breakages, any loss of people not turning in because you have no shows, has to cover any repairs, has to cover any legalities that you need to do, different surveys that you need to do every year, has to cover waste. Everything else comes out of that 10%. It doesn't matter if you triple or double your turnover, those percentages stay the same. So to some degree, that 10% gets bigger. But I know if we doubled our turnover at Lowe's, it wouldn't really make any difference to that amount, if I'm being honest with you. But what it would mean is that people then don't have a great time with us because they're not with us very long. We have to turn their table in an hour and a half as opposed to 2 hours 15. Right. So all of these other things actually become like more stressful, and that's the reason you're in hospitality. You're in hospitality to give people a great time, and therefore you don't want to rush them. You want to feed them the best produce you can, therefore you don't compromise on the ingredients you buy. You want to make sure that the restaurant's warm or chilled, depending on outside, so you don't want to cut down on energy. So all of these things, if you compromise on to try and save a penny, will cost you significantly more in the long run. So it feels like a bad dollar invested, and therefore you do everything properly, but the margins are so tight. It only takes, we're a 42 cover restaurant. If we're full and 2 people don't turn up or no show us, we've lost money that evening. It's that brutal. I talked about energy earlier. When we opened Lowe's up. We forecast about £750, £1,000 a month in energy, and we did that very meticulously. I worked out, the kilowatt hours of all of the equipment that we're going to use for how it's open. It's not just a finger in the air calculation. We're now spending over £4,000 a month in energy, and I bought that particularly well at the time, albeit it's gone up considerably. That £4,000 has to come out the 10%. It's just the maths doesn't work anymore, and we're very lucky that we're a debt-free business. But it takes everything to remain that way. Most operators at the moment are running at over 100% to 110% monthly. It's just not sustainable anymore. And I think the problem is when we all look at each other as a business, and I've recently sat down with our MP, which I would love to talk to you about, and explain this. If 97% of hospitality businesses aren't going to make a profit this year, hospitality is not the problem. There's a bigger problem to be talked about. If it was 10%, you could put it down to the operators, but not at that much. That's just ridiculous. Yeah,
and just then, because time is ticking.
Yeah, sorry,
George. But I just quickly want to ask you as well. Obviously, we've talked about that. We've talked about different challenges and everything. But just quickly, if you could just perhaps sum up as best you can, also what you see for the future of hospitality now and going forward for the rest of this year and into 2027.
I can sum this up really fast. AI is coming after people's jobs. They ain't coming after mine. AI is coming after a whole way of you being able to not speak to people. It is not coming after hospitality. We go out to eat for human connection. You come out to eat to speak to people. You come out to eat to have a great time in a great environment. AI is not coming for that. This sector is going to boom over the next 10 years. We need to survive until that point. So I'm very excited for the future. But what we need to see is help now so we can survive until it gets to that point. George, I am overtly excited for the future.
I can see it in your face. Thank you so much for coming on Business Spotlight. Please do keep in touch. I'm sure we'll have you back again in the future. But I hope you've enjoyed it.
I have. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. That's George Lowe from Lowe's on Carter Street here on Business Spotlight with me, Sonya Farrell.
Business Spotlight, shining a light on our local business community. Brought to you by Cross Rhythms and Baba Baboon.